Hey everyone, it's Kerr from Daydream Nation. And who's in the co-captain seat? I've got Reed Little from the Contrarians. How are you, Reed?
Doing great, Peter. Fabulous to be here on your special occasion for the channel.
Absolutely. It's 1 year that I got this channel all put together, and you were my first guest, and we did a certain artist called David Bowie with Never Let Me Down. And today we're going to do another David Bowie album, the album that preceded that, and we're talking about David Bowie Tonight. So we're going to talk about the album, things that we like, things that we don't, talk about certain songs, first impressions. So I'll just start off with a few little stats. This album came out in 1984. This came after the uber hit of Let's Dance, which is sold by the bucket load all around the world. Tonight went to number 11 in the charts, sold one platinum. In the UK, it went to number 1, sold 100,000 copies, went gold, and in Australia, it went to number 4. So, Mr. Reed Little, what was your first impressions of this album in the day, David Bowie Tonight?
Okay, so back in the 80s, I was not a David Bowie fan, but what I was a fan of was MTV. So my first impression was watching the video, the long form video for Blue Jean. And this was a trend that Michael Jackson started with his long form video for Thriller, which had, creature effects by Stan Winston and Michael turning into a werewolf and Vincent Price narration and all of this great choreography. And that made every prestige artist apparently think that they needed a long form video. And Bowie's is the very next one that I remember. And they announced that, I don't know how long before it came out, but they put it out and built up the hype for it. So I was waiting in front of the TV when that video came on. And it was 20 minutes of slog and boredom until you finally get to the song. And by the time the song's over, I was like, that's it? I waited weeks to see this? So I did not have a favorable impression of Tonight as my very first impression.
Well, I've got exactly the same experience. There was a few music shows in Australia promoting the brand new David Bowie clip, Blue Jean, and I saw it, and I agree, it was a slog because the whole premise of the clip is about a doppelganger. You've got a David Bowie, lookalike, who's awkward with the women, trying to find his way with his partner, and they're going to see this show, who happens to be David Bowie. And it just goes on, it drags. I think it was directed by Julian Temple, correct me if I'm wrong, Reed, who's got fine credos. Look at his cred. And he actually did the movie Absolute Beginners, which David Bowie did a year later, but he did some stuff with the Pistols and very much in that sort of new wave out there sort of filmmaking. But yeah, the song just, it just sort of drags on. And I think that after the negative reaction to that long form video, because it didn't get a lot of positive reaction, because long form videos like Beat It got a lot, or Thriller got a lot of positive reaction. This one didn't. They started showing the 3-minute 45 or 4-minute version of the song.
Right.
So Blue Jean got played everywhere. That was the song on the radio. But this album, I remember it in my department store and in the record store, it didn't seem to move. They had this whole display. It got prime real estate in the record store, but I didn't see a lot of copies going. You come back 3 weeks later, there was the stand, and there was still all these copies of this album, and it just didn't have the heat or sort of the excitement that Let's Dance had. And I think it was because of that preposterous extended video of Blue Jean.
Right. And now I was really shocked to see, if you look online, and I've read a bunch of books about David Bowie, and when people talk about that video, it's spoken of in very positive terms. In fact, I would say, if anything, it has aged better in people's estimation than the album has, which I'm kind of at a loss to understand. But, so be it. People enjoy what they enjoy.
Yeah, I revisited the video, and I still think it's just really saggy. It doesn't go anywhere. It's really a lot of padding, and
Yes.
especially over 20 minutes to get where the finale is the concert where the real David Bowie plays Blue Jean. It's just a long slog. I think that's a great word, slog. So, all right, why don't we talk about the songs? So we're going to talk about songs we like, songs we don't like. So hit me with a song off the album that you really like a lot of tonight.
Okay. Well, Bowie makes this one easy because I really like his very first track. And in fact, I think it should have been the title track of this album. I am absolutely at a loss as to why Tonight, which is a cover song for one thing, and not a particularly great cover song for another thing, is the title track of the album. Now, admittedly, he co-wrote the song, so it's not like, he was stealing somebody else's material, but Loving the Alien is a great song. It has a fantastic vocal performance. It's energetic and upbeat, which is something that side one desperately lacks. Re-listening to the album in preparation for this show, it just really hit me. All of the energetic songs are on side two. I think if they had simply reorganized the track listing, that would have done so much to help the impression of this album, I think. But it's got a great lyric about, religious tolerance and the inaccuracy of the historical record. Bowie sounds fantastic. The production on it is actually a little different than the rest of the album, which makes me wonder if it's got a little bit more of his demo left in it. Bowie's always talking about his demos and how his demos sounded better than the actual album tracks. And there's a whole production rigmarole that we can talk about. There's, who did what and when, and but Bowie sings great on it. The production is very lush. It's got this like vibraphone sound, which I'm sure is a synthesizer, but still it provides a different musical dimension than the rest of the songs. It's got a very prominent bass and drum, the same band that played on Let's Dance and did the Let's Dance tour, at least as the rhythm section. And then Bowie does a fantastic vocal performance. So, I think it's just everything that you want in a David Bowie track from the 80s. Oh, and then interestingly, when the guitar comes in at the end, because the guitar is very, very subdued, but when it finally comes in at the end of the song, it's a solo, and it's a very Stevie Ray Vaughan-esque solo. Almost like he's trying to sound kind of like those, because Carlos didn't play on Let's Dance, which must have been a real slap in the face. And maybe he was trying to show that, hey, I could have done it just as well as Stevie did.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Look, I think it's the song that towers over the whole album. The album's got a very bad reputation. It's always been regarded as one of his worst. Rolling Stone in the album guide give it 1 star. But when you read a lot of the reviews, it always comes back to this one song. Loving the Alien as being the gem in the rough. It definitely hangs over the rest of the material, because a lot of the material, and we'll get into a bit of a deeper dive, is kind of a little bit generic, 80s sounding. But this song, to me, to my ears, could have been on Scary Monsters or even some of those 70 albums, because it's got that soaring strings And what I wrote down is that I really love the string arrangements, especially towards the end where you got the guitar solo, which you said is a Stevie Ray Vaughan, and it goes into this real lilting, emotional, sweeping string arrangement towards the end. And it reminds me of some of Bowie's emotional material of the Ziggy Stardust or the Berlin era. It's got a lot of emotional gravity, this song. I'll read you a direct quote about what Bowie said about what this song means. It says, "It comes about because of my feeling that so much history is wrong, as is being rediscovered all the time, and that we base so much on the wrong knowledge that we've gleaned." So he had an intense dislike of organised religion, and this song basically questions it. Religion causing more conflict than it resolves. Like there's a line in this song, "Your prayers will break the sky in two." So it's a thought-provoking song. It's a great Bowie lyric, but it sticks out like the proverbials out of the whole album. It's the best song on the album, in my opinion. And even you were talking about how it sounds different. This album had actually three producers. So you had Derek Bramble. He was a composer. I'm reading his CV. He composed for The Power Station, Vanessa Williams, Elaine Page, who's a bit of a Broadway West End actress. So that's a very wide-ranging CV. David Bowie also produced it. And then you had Hugh Paghan. He pioneered the gated reverb drum sound used in Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight. So he's a bit of a rock producer legend. So when you think of the gated drum sound, he's the man. And his background, XTC, The Human League, Sting, amongst others. So you've got three producers.
The Police. Yeah.
Yeah. So three producers, and you can tell because there is a sonic difference between this song and some other songs. Anyway, I like this song a lot. Are there any other songs that you're favourable to on this album?
Yeah, there are actually several. I more or less like all of side 2. We can go into that a little bit more in depth. I said side 1 is, well, for one thing, it contains an awful lot of cover songs. We're talking about
he only wrote 2, didn't he?
Yeah, a 9-song album, and 5 of them are cover songs, and then 2 of the remaining songs are co-writes. Although the 2 that he wrote or has sole writing credit on are Blue Jean and Loving the Alien, which are the 2 best songs on the album. So that's interesting. The narrative of it is that he was so tired after doing the Serious Moonlight tour for Let's Dance that he was just creatively spent. And then you look at those 2 songs and I go, really? He was creatively spent, and yet he came up with these 2 fabulous songs. And apparently he was hanging out with Iggy Pop, so he did 3 Iggy Pop covers. Of the 5 cover tunes, 3 of them are Iggy Pop, and 2 of those were co-writes with him, but 1 was not.
Why don't we talk about are we going to side 2? Why don't we talk about Blue Jean? Because you like that song a lot?
Well, it's certainly, at least on this side of the pond, Blue Jean is the enduring single. It's the song that he still does in concert. It's the song that other people have covered. I don't know if you've seen every year, Bowie's former pianist Mike Garson does like a Bowie tribute streaming concert. And Charlie Sexton, who toured with Bowie but never recorded with Bowie. I never understood that. But Bowie used to take him on tour just so he could come out at the end of the night and perform 2 Velvet Underground songs with Bowie.
I saw that tour. There was the Glass Spider tour. Charlie Sexton was on that. I Want to Be Your Dog.
Sexton, now he does Blue Jean, and he just interprets it as a straight up blues rock number. And I think that's why in America, especially, that we like this song so much, is because it's not a complicated song. It's got a very straight ahead blues rock kind of structure, but it's got this really weird lyric. And then if you go back to 1984, this kind of late 50s, early 60s doo-wop sound there was a revival of that sort of thing in America. There were other bands. Oh my gosh, Streets of Fire, the movie Streets of Fire. I cannot remember there were several hit songs off of the soundtrack for that album.
Oh, well, you had I know the Fix were on that soundtrack. You had the Bonnie Tyler. You had that whole sort of, the guy behind Meatloaf, Jim Steinman. It's a very Jim Steinman album. And his wheelhouse is totally the rock and roll, the grandeur sort of sound.
But it has a couple of just straight up doo-wop tracks too. And Bowie loved that style of music.
Dan Hartman, I Can Dream About You. Anyway,
that is the song I was thinking of. Yes, Thank you. I would never have been able to remember that guy's name.
I got the soundtrack, that's why.
So he brings those two things, some blues rock and then some 50s doo-wop, and combines them on this track. And it's not his most complicated effort, but it turns out really well. It's simple and memorable and catchy. It's just not the kind of thing that you would want to hang a 20-minute video on.
Yeah, I think it's okay. I don't think it's top shelf Bowie. I think it's a bit of a throwaway. I think the lyrics are a little bit disposable. I've got a funny story. Well, maybe it's funny, but I read a story that he was recording this album, and he owned a chalet in Switzerland.
Right.
And he just put down the tracks for Blue Jean, and he used to hang out at this club. And he went incognito and he went to the DJ and say, "Hey, can you put this song on?" And it was the Blue Jean. So the DJ put the song on without announcing who it was. And apparently the packed dance floor just cleared. So I don't know, that was maybe a sign of things to come. But I don't know. Maybe the video being so laborious to get through has really tainted my view or opinion of this song, but I just think it's kind of average and it's not top shelf and it's just a little bit kind of disposable. And that's my big beef with this album. A lot of it is very disposable, generic, and seems to be rushed. But when you compare it to Loving the Alien, where it's well crafted and there's been a lot of effort and a lot of thought that's been put in that one song, but the rest of the album, and Blue Jean is one of it, seems to pale in comparison. But hey, it's Critics' Corner. That's just my opinion.
Well, definitely he put most of his lyrical weight behind Loving the Alien. Blue Jean is a very pop lyric. Ironic because he has Iggy Pop helping him with the lyrics
all the way through.
Yeah,
there's so many of Iggy Pop. All right, so that's Blue Jean. Are there any other strong album tracks that you're really quite favorable to on this album?
So two that I'm going to save my most controversial for last. So I actually really like one of his cover tunes from 1977's The Idiot. No, excuse me, Lust for Life. It was off Lust for Life, not The Idiot. The Iggy Pop album that was co-written and produced by David Bowie. And that track is Neighborhood Threat. So as an exercise before doing this video, I actually made a playlist where I put the Iggy Pop track followed by the Bowie cover for each Iggy Pop song on here. And that did not help the David Bowie covers. The Iggy Pop songs are absolutely better songs in all cases. But Neighborhood Threat is just a little bit different because, again, it's energetic, it's upbeat. Bowie produces a very different lyrical feel than Iggy Pop does. You know, he wasn't as belligerent of a person as Iggy. He wasn't as confrontational. And you get the sense that he's more ironic than he is provocative. But I think he really does a good job selling this song. Let me see if I have any good. It's very 80s sounding. Now it is all of the cover tunes on this album cannot escape the black hole of being produced in 1980. This is one of the things you get with Hugh Padgham, right? You've got the gated drums. You've got that synthesizer. It's got a Fairlight synthesizer on it, which sounds exactly like every other band in the 1980s playing the Fairlight synthesizer. You have that refrigerator rack guitar sound, which every studio guitarist in LA, although they recorded this in Canada, but every studio guitarist had this exact same sound. You know, it didn't matter whether it was Journey or Toto, Bon Jovi later. They all had this same guitar sound because they were all buying their refrigerator racks from Bob Bradshaw out in Los Angeles. So I tried to disassociate that from the song, though. Yes, it is of the time, but that doesn't make it bad, right? If you can just turn off that part that says, well, it sounds very 1980s. Yes, it does. But that doesn't make it a bad track. And I think Bowie does a better job with it than he does with his other cover songs.
Yeah, I think it's glossy. A lot of the cover songs or cover versions are just very glossy, and they're not a patch on the originals. Like, I'll if we're going into slightly negative territory, Don't Look Down. That's off the Iggy New Values album, written by Iggy Pop and James Williamson. And you've got this real pseudo reggae beat to it. It's just really bland and beige. And I really think that Bowie was a little bit lost on this album. Of course, where's Bowie the innovator? Where is Bowie being the frontier man and treading new boundaries? I think this guy, it was very unsure. And I know we had a debate about Never Let Me Down. I think Never Let Me Down, I know you don't like the album, but to me, that was more adventurous. He was trying stuff.
Oh, it was way more adventurous.
Yeah, way more. But this is just so safe. And, you know, there's a fine line about doing a cover song and upturning it and doing it a different, stylistically different. But when it comes out and it's all beige and sort of like it sounds really shallow, that really leaves a sort of a mark on this album, and not a good mark at all. But look, Neighborhood Frat at least has a little bit of energy. Right. It's not one of my favorites, but I'm glad that you said that you were comparing it to the Iggy Pop, the original versions, because hands down, Iggy's versions got that verve, that energy, that raw punk sort of style. And that was Iggy arguably at his peak in the Berlin years with David, you know, when they were really just focusing on the creativity side of their careers. So, all right. Are there any others favourable mentions on this album that you want to have a shout out?
Yes, and you're going to enjoy talking about this next one. I know. I am rubbing my hands with glee.
I know what it is, mate. I know what it is, and you're going to get a clap back. I know what it is.
I like David Bowie's version of God Only Knows.
To turn my back on that. What?
I do. So here's the thing. God Only Knows is one of my top 5 Beach Boys songs. I'm a huge Beach Boys fan, have been since the mid 70s. I actually saw the Beach Boys in concert in 1976 or 77. They were my very first concert that I ever went to as a kid. And I love this song, but I don't think it's the unassailable masterpiece that so many people seem to treat it as. I think the music of the Beach Boys song is trite. It's very 60s. It's got syrupy string arrangements and it's designed for AM radio. What people remember is Brian Wilson's wonderful vocal performance, but his vocal performance is pretty. I don't think it has any emotion to it at all. It's a very pretty performance. Whereas when Bowie does it, now Bowie is channeling his crooner influences because Bowie's a huge fan of Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby. So Bowie does a crooning version of it, and he sings multiple different emotional levels during the song, which is something that Brian doesn't even try to do during the Beach Boys version. Now, if anything, like you were talking about with cover tunes, I think all of the cover tunes on this, and there's, he does, I keep forgetting later, he's a little too safe. He would have benefited from doing a more original interpretation of the material instead of taking simply a moderate 80s update of the sound and then providing this very different vocal performance over it. But I think it's a very good vocal performance. I know it really irritates a lot of people, but I quite enjoy it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the first anniversary show and your very contrarian opinion. I wouldn't expect anything less, so round of applause. No, it irritates me. It really does. So I think he's really channeling Scott Walker. It's over-emoting. I'm no Beach Boys fan, but that song does connect with me emotionally, the original version. It's full of melancholy, full of sense of loss, emotion. Even with those 60 arrangements, I think it's a classic, and I don't like the Beach Boys. David Bowie's version is bombastic. It's forced. He over-emotes. I'll repeat it again, he's channeling Scott Walker. And to me, it sort of loses the whole meaning of the song. And, you're going, it's from one extreme to the other. It's like, hot to cold, cold to hot. It's just night and day. It's completely different to the original. But to my ears, it just does not work because it doesn't service the material in the way it should be. And the original song was a nice sort of lyric about life, emotional. It was direct, and this one is just bombastic. And the 80s was bombastic, but this was just 80s bombastic wrong. So, if you read a lot of the critiques of the album, it always picks up on this song. But look, I applaud you that you've got a contrarian viewpoint on this, but he did cop a lot of flack. Because I remember in the day, and I used to read all the magazines like your Rolling Stones and NME, and the critics took great delight in putting the boot in respect of that particular song.
That is true. And one of these days, I know Bowie has on many occasions talked about his love of Scott Walker. I have never heard a single Scott Walker song. He was much bigger in the UK and, across the Atlantic than he ever was in the US. So I have no idea what Scott Walker sounds like, but I'm sure that Bowie would actually take that as a compliment that he's channeling Scott Walker with his performance.
Yeah, but not in the right way. But anyway, all right. Well, thank you for that. Can we talk about Tonight? That was another single,
right,
with Tina Turner. So, what do you think? What's your take on that?
Okay, I don't like it, and it's not that I hate it. I don't skip it, but this is another one that, by way of comparison with the original song, if you listen to Lust for Life, which everybody should do because it's a fun album, Iggy comes up with this apparently improvised intro where he talks about, screams really, about he finds his baby turning blue and he understands that she's dying. And as she's dying, he sings this song, everything's going to be all right tonight. Nobody, no one moved, no one dies. And it's a really emotional sucker punch because of the context that Iggy sets up. In David's performance, and he said in interviews, that was pure Iggy, and that's just not part of me. So he dropped off that intro, but now you've got no context for the song whatsoever. And instead of being heart-wrenching, it's just this nice, simple, light reggae beat. Hey, it's almost Don't Worry, Be Happy, right? It's everything will be all right tonight. And I applaud him for getting Tina Turner involved. From 2022, people may forget just what a huge thing it was to have a Black woman in her mid-40s suddenly catapulted to the top of the pop charts But that was huge. Tina Turner was
Yes.
everywhere in the US, and she was a
Absolutely.
massive sex symbol.
One of the success stories of the 80s. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute.
Yeah, and she credited Bowie as a huge part of that. And then as a thanks, I guess, did this song, and she covered another Bowie song on Private Dancer, which was her big album.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
and he got assigned to the Capitol label, so he gave her a bit of a props.
yeah. And sadly, though, all of that having been said, I don't think she adds anything to this song. It's just another pleasant voice in a pleasant song, and it's okay. But it's nothing special. It's low energy, and I don't understand why it's the title track of the album.
Yeah, look, I would put this one notch above Muzak. It's really, really sort of dire. It's beige. It's reggae light, LITE. It just doesn't add. And I think it's a real low energy title track. I agree. But kudos that he got Tina Turner. She sings with a little bit of gusto. Apparently they were doing it, recording their tracks in the studio face to face, but Bowie didn't like the first verse, so he re-recorded and did an overdub on that. So that's a little bit of trivia. Look, Tina Turner was definitely one of the success stories, but there were so many artists in the 80s, just an observation, that were big in the 60s, had the doldrums in the 70s, and then came alive in the 80s. Like I'm talking like Steve Winwood. You know, he's another artist that, had a whole new career. Robert Palmer. I'm talking about these artists that had a whole new lease of life in the 80s, and Tina Turner was part of that, and that was a huge success story. So maybe she did add a little bit of a few units on the R&B charts. I don't know. I haven't checked the stats in respect to this album, but this song is it's a little bit lightweight for my liking.
Yeah, definitely.
Any other tracks that you want to cover?
Let's see here. I think we've basically hit everything except.
I was going to say Tumble and Twirl. That's a very busy track. Musically, you could hear the virtuoso performances of the band, the slap bass, the rhythm, the drumming, but as a song, it's kind of forgettable. What do you think of this one, Tumble and Twirl? Yeah. Another Bowie pop composition.
And the Borneo horns, and talking about Bowie and Iggy's vacation in Indonesia. I think possibly in Borneo. I don't remember the exact location he mentions. I think it is, a lot of it is apparently ad-libbed lyrics from Iggy, which David would write down and then arrange into some sort of song. So they're talking about their vacation, but there's also just a tiny bit of social subtext where he talks about there's a general with a big mansion and his sewage flows down on the village. And, no matter how much people hate him, when he's showing a movie, they all show up and party. Kind of going back to the themes that Bowie had in his videos, if not his lyrics, for Let's Dance.
Yes.
Bowie was always, a proponent for indigenous peoples.
Yes, absolutely.
But, it's a lightweight song, but it's fun and energetic and danceable. So I don't mind it. I mean, it's not top tier Bowie, but it's a huge step up from Tonight or Don't Look Down.
Well, my daughter did a pirouette to it, so must have done the trick to an 8-year-old. But yeah, it's a very energetic playing. Hey, what do you think of the album cover, Reed?
Actually, I really like it.
Yeah.
It's so colorful. It doesn't really say anything in terms of a connection with a concept or anything, but as an image, I think it's striking.
Yeah, it's very similar to a Hall & Oates album that came out in the same year. Name escapes me, but that sort of big brush strokes. There were a few albums that came out in the mid-'80s that had really big, thick sort of painting brush strokes and an artist's sort of different reimagining like almost Andy Warhol. It's sort of like pop art of the artist in question. But yeah, I just wanted your opinion. I think it's a very interesting album cover.
Yeah, I like it. I think it's certainly an eye catcher. It's, it's too bad that maybe it didn't get in more sales.
It didn't. It didn't.
We'll say one thing that I found really, really interesting. So the last track, Dancing with the Big Boys,
yep,
which is, I put it about the same quality level as Tumble and Twirl. It's okay. It's energetic. It may be about a theme of big companies trotting on the little guy, but that's a very lightweight theme. There's no real exploration of it in the lyrics. But Bowie said in interviews that song comes closest to accomplishing musically what he wanted to accomplish on this album, which I find fascinating because I would have thought Loving the Alien would take that, because Loving the Alien is the track that, again, there was the one song on Let's Dance, all of a sudden it's escaping me, which sounds like Loving the Alien, which sounds like, oh goodness, some of his work on the Labyrinth soundtrack, which sounds like Never Let Me Down. So there's that through line through the 80s, and that is all very different than Dancing with the Big Boys, which is, again, it's okay, but I don't hear anything in it that says, yes, this is what David Bowie was really trying to do.
Well, that's an interesting point, because sometimes artists will have an attachment to a song based on how they labored over the song. So you and I might hear something different and go, really? But we weren't there during the writing process or the recording process, and maybe there's some sort of an emotional attachment that Bowie had in recording that song that was his takeout when he was doing the interviews post the album, to say, hey, that's the song that I would define as what I wanted Tonight to sound like. So I think it may be to do with blood, sweat and tears and actually putting that track down.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting. Another thing I wanted to point out is that post this album, he put out a couple of absolutely killer soundtrack singles. And I sort of look back and think, if the album was held over and he dropped some of these lesser songs that we've written and he put those songs on this album, it would have been a lot stronger. I'm talking about Absolute Beginners. That was nowhere going to be on this album, because that was always going to be on that soundtrack. That's one of my favorites. I love that song. And All This Is Not America off the Falcon and the Snowman soundtrack.
Right.
That would have been another great song. So he still had the ability to knock out of the park these absolute gems, but they were released as singles. So I think this album, it's really Loving the Alien, and that song has aged really, really well and taken a life of its own, because I don't remember in the day, Reed, in 1984, that there was much heat on that song. It was all Blue Jean.
Right. Oh, I never remember hearing it, even though he did a video for that. And I watched MTV. Like from the time I got home from school until the time I went to bed, I had MTV on. It was crazy. I was obsessed with that. And I never saw the video for Loving the Alien.
Yeah.
So it didn't get played.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like Never Let Me Down. There's one breakout song that has aged really well and people refer to, and that's Time Will Crawl. So even these albums that have been critically panned, there always seems to be one or two songs that take a life of its own. And in this instance, it is definitely Loving the Alien. It's one of my favorite Bowies. It's probably top 10 at least.
It's a fantastic song. I know I've read, among other things, Bowie at one point thought about doing a Pinups Part 2, which is why he had so many cover songs and 60s cover songs like I Keep Forgetting and God Only Knows. Those would have been on his like Pinups 2. Maybe the record company said, no, look, you had the best, you had I think Let's Dance went to number 4 in America, but nonetheless, a hugely popular album. They weren't about to let him follow it up with a throwaway covers album, even though he still introduced an album that was more than half covers. And you've got, like you say, 3 producers. At some point, they got fed up with, oh, I've got to look at my notes. I'm sorry, I'm missing it. Bramble, Derek Bramble. They got fed up with him and fired him, and Hugh Pat, or he left. And then Hugh Padgham ended up doing the production for the rest of the album, but you don't know who produced what, right? I've read that Bowie didn't really interact with his musicians and just let them do whatever they wanted. But then on the other side, I've also read that Bowie came in with 7 of 9 songs already with complete demos. Well, if you've got demos as guides, you're not just leaving people alone. So there's a lot of contradictory information about the production on this album. Sadly, that we'll probably never get kind of a straight version of, because no one cares at this point.
Well, I care anyway. Maybe the truth's halfway in between, but anyway. So overall, what's your assessment of this album? I don't really like it. I just think it's not. I think it's one of David Bowie's lesser efforts, and save for the glorious "Loving the Alien." What's your final view on this album?
I think that it is Bowie's least creative album, but even though that's a pretty damning statement, I still like it. I listen to it more often than I listen to Young Americans, and Young Americans is a vastly more creative album than this.
Well, maybe we've got an idea for our next show on Bowie. Reed Little, as always, thank you, mate. You've been a great supporter of the channel. You were our first guest, and I can always depend on you, mate, to deliver the goods and, come on the show. Anyway, please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Share. Tell us what you think about David Bowie Tonight. Do you agree? Not agree? And Reed and I will do a show very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Great to be here.
See ya.